everybody. My name is Ben Tugwell, and this is a podcast for the Rooted Leader Intensive that's coming up this summer on June 13 and 14. You can find all the information at rootedintensive.com. Me and my friend Madeline Spring, we're colleagues in the Townsend leadership space. We would love to see you there. And this podcast is designed to kind of give you some content, a little bit of like, what are the things that we're going to cover at the Rooted Leadership Intensive. And we have today a special guest with us, Dr. Michele Fleming from Atlanta, Georgia. And she is going to share with us a little bit about burnout. Before we start, Michele is a licensed psychologist. She's a consultant, executive coach, and she is a colleague with Madeline and I in the Townsend Leadership program. And she focuses a lot on executive leaders, pastors. She's been married for 18 years, has 2 kids in the Atlanta area. And so she's going to talk a little bit about burnout today. And so, Michele, thank you so much, first of all, for joining us. And tell us a little bit about burnout. What do you notice with leaders in burnout?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Great to see you both.
Yeah.
Love collaborating and working together in this space on Townsend leadership. So I would say a majority of leaders that I first meet are struggling with some aspect of burnout.
Mhm.
And what that can feel like is my work life is intruding too much in my personal life. If it's not hours, it's up here. It's rent and space here when I'm supposed to be with my family. It can be family issues coming too much into, or personal issues coming too much into the workspace. But it also can really manifest as just this general sense of drudgery. Like I used to love this, or I'm even working for the Lord and I'm working in my ministry or my nonprofit, or I want to bring my faith into my workspace and I just don't feel like I'm doing it the way I want, or I feel called to because of lack of energy or focus, or, just that weariness. And sometimes if it goes for too long, it ends up being like, now I'm not even sure I care anymore.
Yeah.
And it's a real battle for pastors because we are losing pastors. And this is burnout is the path to losing pastors. So very passionate about that piece of it.
Sure.
I'm curious, like, what are some of the examples of burnout that you've seen that you kind of go, or what is like the red flags that you notice? Okay, this person is experiencing burnout.
Yeah. So the most obvious red flag is when somebody says it, which is great. I mean, sometimes there's enough insight. And so saying it or thinking it, but maybe not having anyone to say it to.
Yeah.
That happen a lot. I see low grades of general irritability, and that's a sign of burnout. We all have irritable days, but I'm talking about it lasting for a while, low energy and low fatigue. It can also look like kind of difficulty focusing and really feeling like you have your passion. So, we're not talking about diagnosing a depression or anything like that, but like, I just don't have my drive and my passion that I used to. And I'm not sure why, or I know why, and I'm not sure what to do about it.
That's great. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I've noticed that personally in my life too. You just keep going and going, and you don't have the tools or even know that you're there until maybe something triggers, and then you start to notice, wait a minute, that's not me. I wouldn't have normally responded that way. What happened there? And then you start to go, wait, look at my calendar and look at things that have happened. Okay, maybe I'm experiencing something a little bit more than I have the capacity to handle. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about at the Rooted Leader Intensive this summer is capacity. What does it mean to grow in capacity? What does it mean to identify some of these deeper things that help me recognize sooner than later when I'm experiencing burnout? And so what do you find that leaders need when they are going through experiencing burnout?
Yeah, great question. So the biggest issue with leaders in danger of experiencing burnout is isolation. And that is why something like the Rooted Leadership Intensive that you are doing in June is huge, because it's bringing leaders together for the content and the learning, but it's also to be in the room that other people understand what it's like to be in that position of the leader. You really can't turn to people on your staff, or you shouldn't be. you shouldn't be. It doesn't always turn out well. They don't have someone to go to download all the stress that they get in being a leader. And behind the isolation sometimes is I don't even know that I need it, or I don't like myself that I need it. Like if I ask for help or if I need
Mhm.
other people, that means I'm weak. That means I'm not strong. And the research is showing it's actually the opposite, that
Wow.
the leaders that really scale and move to the next level are those that know how to, what we like to say, get outside voices inside the conversation,
Mhm.
right? So the conversation happening here, getting some outside voices in. And
Mhm.
that is a piece that you guys will be addressing in terms of kind of
Mhm.
attachment and
Yeah.
not journeying alone. Like us today, like we support each other. Three of us, I know, kind of work in our own
Yeah.
private practices, or how you guys, Ben, Madeline, are doing this together.
Yeah.
That is an example of like, this is how we avoid that isolation.
Yeah, which is so crucial. And of course, with pastors and with any leaders that we're working with, that is, I see that all the time, that the higher you rise in leadership, the more isolated that you are, the less support that you have. And so it really does require intentionality to surround yourself with a coach or a group that is able to speak into you on that level and support you even in that. So isolation, what else do you kind of go after as you're working with leaders that are facing burnout?
Yeah, isolation. And then the next big category is boundaries. Nobody
Mhm.
in burnout really likes that word, but
Mhm.
that's okay. We call it in our house the circle of responsibility. Like, here's my circle of responsibility. It's
Yes.
over me.
Yes, we use the hula hoop in our household,
There
like,
you
"What's in my hula hoop?"
go. Exactly.
We
So
say the fence in the yard. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
love
Mhm.
it. We all got our
Mhm.
reference because it just applies everywhere.
Yeah.
Just relational wisdom is biblically based. Obviously, Dr. Townsend and with Dr. Cloud has written 30 books and sold 10 million
Mhm.
copies, and a huge portion of that is the Boundaries series.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
just works. I know the
Mhm.
first book I read that got introduced to this stuff was their Boundaries book, and I
Mhm.
was like, I don't
Mhm.
totally get it, but I know this is truth. So I got
Mhm.
to dig into this further. So the next step would be, how do I know what's my responsibility and what's not? I
Yeah.
am responsible for my thoughts, my actions, my behaviors, and I'm responsible to lead with integrity and lead with authenticity. But then how someone else responds to that, that's not my responsibility.
Mhm.
That's good.
Yeah,
Mhm.
That's good.
yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
so that what's my responsibility and what's not, you're really getting after some of those people-pleasing tendencies that we might have developed way earlier in life, not even be aware of. Whether it's people-pleasing or having to keep this image of looking like we've got it all. Yeah, we see that a lot, right? Where leaders just say yes to too many things. They're wearing too many hats. They're not
that's the second
boundarying.
piece that people don't understand about boundaries that you just mentioned. What's
Mhm.
inside my boundaries is that authenticity. And if I'm
Mhm.
people pleasing, or if I'm afraid of how people are going to respond, or I'm afraid I'm going to lose an employee, or how the
Mm,
relationship will be impacted by actually speaking up,
Right.
then it becomes an issue with, that resentment stays with me, or the problem isn't getting addressed. We're not
Mhm.
solving problems. Boundaries aren't about cutting off relationships. They're about restoring relationships to a healthy place
Yeah.
that we can problem solve.
mm,
Yes, it's so good that you're saying that. And that is a common misconception that we hear with boundaries is that, oh, people don't like your boundaries. Sometimes that is true, but the intent of them is really to enhance relationship. It means I don't have to be resentful that I'm doing more than I should be, or that you're not doing what I feel like you ought to be, right? It's clarity on what's mine and what's not, what's your responsibility and what's not.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
good.
Another good um, litmus test for burnout is what you just said, is that
Yeah.
resentment. If I have a
Yeah.
lot of resentment in my different relationships or at work, or
Yeah.
sometimes we resent the family because they're in the way of work,
Right.
we can
Right.
go that way. But if it's
So
this
true.
overriding constant thing, then there's some lights on the dashboard, as they like to say, are
Yes.
blinking.
Yes.
it's good. Yeah, I love the way that y'all are talking about Peter because when we think about boundaries, oftentimes I'll hear, well, you got to take a sabbatical or you got to take time off. You have to have clear days off and, date nights with your spouse and vacation times. And that's what kind of gets lost sometimes in the conversation
Mhm.
as what I've heard over the years about, me being a pastor here. And that's what boundaries are. It's putting your phone away at a
Mhm.
certain time and not answering. And yeah,
Right.
those
It's
are
a small part of it.
Right,
those are aspects
you're
for
getting
sure.
there.
Yeah, we're getting there. But and
Yeah.
sometimes people will go, well, I'm doing well with them because I've made these steps.
Mhm.
And what I find, what you guys are describing, what y'all are describing is something more internal, something about, responsibility, resentment, these boundaries from within, that happen. And so could you talk a little bit about that, Michelle,
Yeah.
a little bit of those boundaries within that have to happen and take place? Yeah.
I would love to, because like you said, this is where boundaries get misused. And so the only boundary you can set is with yourself. We don't set boundaries for other people, right? So I can say to you, don't talk to me that way. Not enforceable, because I control
Right.
your mouth, right? But what I can say is, hey, when you raise your voice, or when you move into what I call character assassination, when it starts to get ugly, then I am going to respond by, I'm going to ask you to stop, or I might have to end the conversation, or I might have to pause until we can talk through it. But the boundary I set is with myself.
That's
So
right.
my internal process is, I'm going to set a boundary on anything that's going to make me angry and resentful. I'm going to set a boundary on my anger. I'm going to set a boundary on my people pleasing. I'm going to set a boundary on my desire to control, because we're all control freaks. Good leaders, probably a little bit control freaks. I don't know who you're talking about, but maybe. And so, hey, when that control is like preventing other people from growing, when that control is, we're not getting it done because it can't all go through one person, right? When I see the limits, my just natural limits, then I'm going to put boundary on that. That's the hard work. It's the internal work of the leader.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about where attachment and connection get in the way. We've talked about boundaries. What's another area where you see leading to burnout?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We can step through the 4 pieces of the growth model.
Yeah. We're kind of heading there, aren't we?
So the other piece that we call in the Townsend world integration, I like to describe as integrating the good and the bad of life. Life has its goods and its bads, and that one doesn't have to destroy the other. I think people really have a hard time understanding that you can actually have both exist at the same time. Most of us are okay with the good, although the perfectionists don't like celebrating the good. So if that's you, you just want, yeah, great, move on without slowing down to celebrate. That's a piece of integration. The other, most people don't want to look at, is what we call negative reality. Like, I don't want to see that problem. I'm going to distract myself. I'm going to denial, just pretend like it goes away if I don't address it. Right. That is where huge problems begin in an organization. It affects trust. I don't trust the leader to address this. Others can see the damage that this one issue or person might be doing, and the leader is just denying the negative. It might be a great person, right? Again, we don't see the person as all bad or all good. We're all good people, right? All made with this human dignity, this dignity that Christ has given us, and we're all fallen and have flaws. So we got to be able to interact with both of those. So when leaders are avoiding problems, avoiding addressing issues, that's a huge piece that lends it to burnout, because it's the internal burnout that starts to happen. And
it takes so much energy to push that stuff aside, to shove it down, to try to keep up this image that everything's great.
Well said.
Exactly. Actually, sometimes I tell my clients, I conceptualize anxiety is that psychic energy it takes to push down other things I don't want to feel.
Oh, that's so good. Yes.
So it can manifest as anxiety ramped up. Always busy. I'm always busy. I got so much going on, because if I slow down, I'm going to notice something that I'm feeling, or notice my relationships. So, yeah.
And really, we're numbing, right? By doing that, by staying so busy that we don't have to feel the things. That numbing, of course, is going to, like Brene, but we can't just numb the good, right? We're numbing the good and the bad, the joy and the heartache.
And I don't know why we're designed that way. I like tell the clients, I wasn't in charge of the design, but when you turn down the negative, like, oh, I don't want to see it all, everything else attenuates with it, the good, exactly what you're saying.
True.
And so we just have to go with how we're designed, which is identifying what needs to be kind of faced, even if it's painful, even if it involves loss or grief. Because some people say, why? Well, because you get it out, and it's not stuck inside of here, leading you, making you either burnt out or this anxious leadership. People can feel that.
I'm glad you mentioned the loss and grief too, because that's kind of in that same quadrant of where the problems can come up and can absolutely, I'm sure you see, lead to burnout. Like when a leader is managing and going along okay, but then has a huge, maybe personal loss, or could be a business loss or something. Of course, that, I mean, maybe speak to what that does in terms of burnout for the leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see this so frequently. So many really high-end leaders have had some sort of business betrayal
Hmm.
where they've had a really close friend slash colleague built the church together, built the business together, or they brought someone under that they wanted to launch and they were close in each other's personal lives. And then it goes sideways or split,
Yeah.
right? And that is a heavy burden to carry, that
Mm.
sense of betrayal. And what happens is we don't lean into what that real loss was.
Hmm.
It could be loss of what I thought the relationship was, loss of
Mhm.
what I thought was going to happen, but then also this loss of like, why didn't I see it? Was
Hmm.
that whole
Yeah.
relationship fake? Was it never real? And you
Right.
carry that with you, that it actually impacts your ability to then have the good, healthy relationships that you need to have in your business or ministry to kind of lead your team through it and lead your team to the next, the next place that you want to head. Same with personal. If there's personal betrayals, we all know this. It's harder to enter into the next relationship if you
Yeah.
don't process that, be it a friendship, or a romantic relationship. And it's really the same in
Mhm.
leadership. So that's a huge part. Sometimes the burnout was happening before the betrayal. That's the denying the negative reality, or
Mhm.
so those two things get mixed together. Or I didn't want to see this great person. I didn't want to see their imperfections.
Hmm.
I didn't want to address what maybe other people were noticing. So that's it's just a very interesting.
Mhm.
If it hasn't happened to you and you're a leader, then know that if it does, you're not alone, right? You're not alone.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah. Well, there's a part of that too. It just shows that you care. Like it shows that I cared about that relationship. I cared about that person.
Mhm.
And to grieve it, it honors it in a way of I'm sad of a loss, but I'm losing something I really cared about. And
Mhm.
that can get missed sometimes too with I was meeting with a leader a couple of years ago, who's a pastor who went through some betrayal similar to what you described, and
Mhm.
said, "Yeah, I just prayed and gave it to God, and it was done." And I'm like, "Oh, I think that's gonna take some time to
Yeah.
process and metabolize, and God gave you tear
Mhm.
ducts to experience those
Mhm.
tears."
Mhm.
And then in the same way, Easter weekend's a good example of that integration of there's a Good Friday, and we sit in the
Mhm.
death of Christ, and we weep over the sorrow of what we
Mhm.
experience, and then
Mhm.
the life of the resurrection, the joy that we can experience in the
Mhm.
resurrection. And it's like we
There's no
want
skipping those 3 days.
there's no skipping those 3 days. And
Mhm. Yeah.
that to me is a picture a little bit of grief of, like, God showing
Yeah.
us that part of integration. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
that this is how restoration happens. It's through, can be through suffering and pain. Interesting you say that because it also kicks off with a betrayal.
Mm,
Even Jesus was betrayed
Yeah.
yeah,
by an apostle. I mean, can be any closer, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah,
yeah.
it's
Mhm. So
it
good.
it just shows as part of our human nature and humanness
Mhm.
we get together. I always like to say
Mhm.
it's the greatest team ever formed in the history of the world, and no, it's not the New England Patriots, although it was for a time. I was a Patriots fan. We have a team that Jesus put together, back to the isolation piece, because he didn't wanna do it alone. He could have, right?
Mhm.
He done
Yeah,
it all on his
Right.
own. He wanted a group and wanted them to be together,
Yeah.
and to help that isolation piece, and to help, further his kingdom. And he showed them this is what healthy integration looks like.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, that's so good. And it's such an important conversation to be having because it's not something we are taught. Just like that pastor that you were referring to, we're not taught it in church. We're not taught it in the culture. This idea of leaning in when there is grief and suffering. We want to put a band-aid on it and feel better. I mean, you can't go to a playground and not hear a parent, coaching their kids into not feeling whatever they're feeling. And I've been
Right,
guilty of it too. Right, but our tendency is to wrap it up, make it look pretty, and move on, and as quickly as possible. And so, what we're really talking about is something very different, like really the opposite. More
mm,
leaning into. We have to assess. what's really going on, because it, again, just takes too much energy not to, and it's going to keep bubbling up in other areas of your leadership in your life if you don't address it well.
Yeah, a great term that's out there is called failing forward. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're a leader and you're pushing the envelope and you're doing what you feel called to do, there's going to be failures, right? We're all going to do it imperfectly. We all have our failures. Failing forward means that failure progresses me forward. And the only way that can happen is if I slow down and honor what was lost. What would I do different? And there's such a sense in our culture now that you can't talk about that. You can't not be the perfect selfie and, the perfect image. And that works for a little bit. It does. But eventually the burnout happens, which again is why the intensive that you guys are doing is just so important for today's business leaders and pastors and heads of nonprofits, and really anybody that has a circle of influence. It can be whether you lead in the home or lead as a volunteer at the ministry. Any place you want to increase your influence, this would be the place to learn how to do that.
That's great. Well, thank you, Michele. We really appreciate your time and helping us get this content out to people that, maybe are curious about a little bit of deeper things. Like, I've noticed these patterns in my life and I'm trying to figure out how to break it. This habit, I've noticed burnout and I've put some parameters in, but it just hasn't been enough to really create the transformation change that I'm looking for. And so that's what we're hoping for at the intensive. And I think you helped us communicate it even better to people that we're hopefully trying to reach through this. So really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I have a passion for burnout. There's a couple free ebooks on my website, one for business leaders, one for pastors. So you can just go to drmichelefleming.com. You can kind of see the name there. It's the exact website, Dr. Michele with one L, Fleming with one M .com. And there'll be a pop-up there and you can download one of the ebooks that talks at length about burnout and what to do.
That's
and
awesome.
We know that there's great content and you're listening to it now, or you might read it, but to actually apply it is where you go in person to have these experiences where you can take what we're talking about here and individualize it to your specific situation. And that's the real benefit of having that piece with the intensive.
So, and we'll make sure we share that link. It's from your website and the ebook and how people can access it, because I know it's going to be great and a great resource for any type of leader. So we really do appreciate that. So
thank you so much, Dr. Michele. You're doing such awesome work, and it is just such an honor to partner with you in any way. So
thank you.
Appreciate you.
Seeing you both. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.